So I thought ordering Samsung's 5K display was a mistake. But after spending 1 week with this thing, I felt different.
So I can just feel the anticipation coming from your screen right now. But I got you. I think we can agree that there's a lot of interest since the Samsung Viewfinity S9 just dropped. Finally, it's available here in Canada and I've got my hands on one. So I've been using it every day for about a week now. And I personally really love it. It is a very difficult monitor to recommend the audience I think Samsung wants this monitor for. So we're going to see if Samsung's asking price of $1599 is on the money, how it compares with its predecessor, the Samsung M8, and should you get the Apple Studio display instead, since this is clearly targeting that market. So let's dive in. For some quick housekeeping here, if you were brave enough to pick up the S9, what do you get out of the box? So first of all, you get the display panel, and it's quite heavier than the M8 if you've had that before. Then you get the stand assembly. Now, just like its predecessor, you also get 2 display cables. You get a Thunderbolt USB-C cable, as well as a mini display port to standard display port cable, and both cables are short just like last year. I will give them credit for the display port cable though, because that one actually gets to a little bit over 5 feet and the USB-C Thunderbolt cable gets to a little over 3 feet. I'd have liked to see the Thunderbolt 4 cable be something like 4 feet at least. I think that would have been better. And then clear the way, guys, for possibly the world's largest power brick. Just look at the size compared to the M8 version. I mean, that thing was already huge. I guess Samsung were really looking to one-up themselves in every department, including the size of the power brick. I know for a fact that there are a lot of people who will not pick this monitor just because of the size of the power brick. Now, you also get a similar webcam assembly, just like the M8 version. This time, it's a 4K camera, which you would think is a considerable upgrade from the last version, right? Whether or not it is actually better, we'll go over that later on in the video. And then you get the manual that everyone absolutely reads for sure. Now, setting this up was pretty straightforward, just exactly how it was with the M8. First thing you want to do here is set up the actual stand assembly, put the stand into the base plate. That already comes with a screw. So once you screw it in, it's set up, it's good to go. Now, the next thing is just to take the display and line it up with 2 fins you're going to see on the mounting bracket. Once you put it in, it'll clip into place and you're good to go. Now, this is one of the first places you're going to notice the build quality that everyone's been talking about. There's a small space between the stand and the base plate. I was initially thinking this was just unique to my unit, but I saw other YouTubers with the same space in their videos and I was like, okay, this is kind of like a bit of a widespread thing. It might not be the biggest deal, but it's just something that you're going to notice. Now that you have it assembled, what's the setup process like? I will say it was a little bit longer than I would have hoped for compared to the M8. I tried to set this up with the phone using the SmartThings app and it froze on me twice. So the only way I could get this set up was using the remote. If you decide to go with the remote, the setup process was pretty straightforward. They did ask a lot more questions compared to the M8, but it eventually gets the job done. The setup process was not as smooth as I would have liked it, but we're finally here now, right? Now that you have this setup, the screen is on, there's still another setup you need to do. So this is optional, but I definitely recommend you do this to get the most accurate image out of the monitor. One of the things they mentioned in the marketing was that they drastically improved the calibration feature that was on the M8 on the S9. On there, you had just one mode. Here you have 2 modes. You have a basic mode and a pro mode. The basic mode, the entire calibration process takes about like 3 to 5 minutes. On the pro mode, it could take as long as 15 minutes. Now, from my experience between both of them, I didn't see too much of a difference between the pro and the basic calibration. And considering that the pro mode requires you to set up a tripod with your phone close to the screen about 3 centimeters for like 15 minutes, I'll just go with the basic mode. Let's talk about the aesthetics, the overall design. They've not changed too much here. First thing is the fact that we now get only one color, which is this silver grayish design. The second thing is that they've moved the sensor port from the down right corner in the M8 to the middle. It kind of just looked awkward in my eyes. The natural position in my perspective would have been the center, so I'm glad that they've moved it this time. And the third thing is the mount we're getting. On the M8, you could only do a height and tilt adjustment. On here, you can do height, tilt, and rotation. If you had a monitor arm that was the standard VESA mount, you could just mount it to a VESA monitor arm. Now, at the back, you can notice the speakers. Are they better than the M8? What do you think? I'm kidding. they're just as trash. So I want to quickly talk about the build quality of the S9. It still wobbles, if that's your question. Well, to be fair, if you're comparing the S9 to the M8, there's a considerable leap forward in terms of the overall build quality. Now, one thing I'll quickly say is that a lot of people like to compare this to the studio display. I don't think there's any monitor out there that even comes close. So for me personally, I actually have no issues with the build quality. That's my take on that. Now, let's talk about the display quality of the S9. To put things into perspective, let's go over the specs of the display itself. So this would peak at 600 nits. It supports HDR and has a contrast ratio of about 1000:1. Now, that was something that was a little bit of a worry for me because the M8 is 3000:1, and that's owing to its VA panel. Whereas on the S9, it's an IPS panel. With this, you're going to get better viewing angles and generally an overall brighter display. But I suspected that there would be slightly elevated black levels just because of the contrast ratio. And also, it's a matte finish display, and that tends to not have as deep blacks compared to a glossy finish like the Apple Studio display. So yes, if you compare it to the M8 directly, the black levels on the M8 are slightly better. I would gladly take that trade-off because the color vibrancy, accuracy, there's no question. You can't even compare in any way, shape or form. It's a night and day difference. And I'm happy for that because that's the most important reason why I got it. And that's the reason why I'm keeping it. Now, this is a 5K resolution and it definitely shows. Once I went back to the M8, I kept on taking off my glasses and putting it back on thinking that there was something smudging it because the M8 looked blurry. And I was like, I've never experienced it looking blurry like this before. That 5K resolution does make a difference. Unfortunately, this does cap out at 60 Hertz. Just like last year's version, for most of the work that I do, I really don't mind it being at 60 Hertz. But I do know that there's some people that want something higher. You're out of luck in that case. But I will say, even though both of them are 60 Hertz, motion looks a bit better on the S9. And this translates in a big way when we actually talk about gaming later on in this video. So as you would expect or not expect, right? There's no FreeSync or G-Sync on this, but the input lag is very decent. And once you go into game mode, that further optimizes it better. So I want to quickly talk about the color gamut you're getting on these monitors. I don't know if I'm ever really pronouncing that word properly, but we'll just go with however I pronounce it throughout the rest of this video. So with the M8, we had the standard sRGB Rec 709. With the S9, we're getting the sRGB and also DCI-P3 color space. Now they're boasting 99% coverage on the S9. That's pretty impressive. I don't know if you can catch that difference, but even in this shot right here on the S9, you can see that car is red, but on the M8, I don't know what that color is. It has completely transformed my grading process. Like things that I thought were a certain shade, I'm now seeing the real shade on this. Like this is game changing for me personally, at least. So what is the gaming experience like on the S9? Now, certainly you're not necessarily buying this monitor to game on it, but there will be times that you would. So if you do, what is that experience like? It's actually quite better than the M8 in its gaming performance, but it's not in a very objective way. Let me try to explain. Now, both of them are 60 Hertz. What I found playing games at 60 frames per second on both monitors was the fact that the motion clarity was better on the S9. I think it's the faster pixel response rate that they're having on there. It's not the most noticeable thing, but it's quite noticeable. Now, speaking about motion being one of its strong suits, it also does have a caveat. Once you go on the extreme preset on the S9, it introduces this kind of dark halo effect around edges when you're in motion. So it almost has a exaggerated HDR effect. The look might be subjective. For me, it works in some games, and for some others, it doesn't look good. So the great thing is that you can just step down to the middle option and you will still get the benefit of improved input lag, but you just won't get that exaggerated edge effect on objects once you're in motion. Another thing, because the S9 has a wider color gamut, this is one of the most obvious step ups that you're going to notice when playing games. I mean, just see for yourself. It is night and day. There is no comparison. It almost feels like I'm playing two different games at this point. I'm happy to report that I actually enjoy gaming way better on the S9 compared to the M8. Now, there are a few things I wanted to point out that I've noticed. I'll give a disclaimer. This has not happened to me. My experience since I've got mine has been perfect. However, I've seen quite a number of complaints online. I mean, there's some people who said they got the monitor and it stopped working after one day. I saw another person who the top frame of the monitor was actually bent. I can't imagine how I would have felt if I received mine that way. Generally, I would just advise that if you're going to get this monitor, don't get it on Amazon. Try to get it from somewhere like Best Buy or an actual trust store that you can see it, somewhere that has some form of warranty that you can return it in case you had any issues. Now, I want to talk about the ports that we get on the S9. Now, I think this is a bit subjective to most people. So on the M8, we had just 3 ports, 2 USB-C ports and a micro HDMI port. On here, we're getting 3 USB-C Gen 3 ports, 1 Thunderbolt USB-C display port, and a mini display port. Now, I would have kind of liked if the mini display port was a standard HDMI port. Maybe you just wanted to keep the footprint at the back small, but in my opinion, I think you gain greater access to most devices once it's a standard HDMI port, which in my use case doesn't really bother me too much because I use a PC anyways that does have a display port at the back of it. But I still really love the fact that you can get 2 inputs into this thing. The Thunderbolt 4 USB-C display port also delivers 90 watts charging. So that means you could use just 1 cable for your MacBook Pro. Granted, on the studio display, this goes up to 96 watts, but pretty much in the same ballpark in my opinion. Moving on to the webcam, this was something that I found to be weird because it's definitely a step back in terms of the build quality. It just felt flimsier than the M8. And one thing I could say for sure is that the magnets on the S9 are definitely weaker than the M8. Now, they also say this is a 4K webcam. Does it really translate to a better image? From my experience, not really. On here, we're just getting more pixels, but the quality of those pixels remain the same, if that makes sense. And the field of view is a bit wider. The microphones on the webcams are improved though. It just picks up your voice better. I'll give some audio samples just so that you have an idea.
So this is what the 4K web camera on the S9 does look like. I mean, it doesn't look that great. It looks very grainy on my view, but this is just to give you a sample of what the video is like, as well as the audio. In terms of the actual quality, I can't really see any difference, to be honest. It's just a larger image this time around. So yeah, let's switch over to the M8's camera. And this is the camera quality on the M8. Quite frankly speaking, I don't know what it is exactly, but the camera quality looks way better on the M8 in my opinion. The motion just feels better. It's less grainy. The S9 looks considerably worse, even though it's a higher resolution web camera. Maybe the mics are better, but as far as what I'm actually seeing on the webcam itself, no comparison. I would take the M8's camera over this. I just don't know. Maybe when I compare the footage, I would see what the difference is. But in my opinion, the M8's camera is definitely better.
Yes, I've reviewed footage out of both webcams, and they're both garbage. We're going from a 1080p camera to a 4K camera. I clearly expected something better. I mean, if you look at both cameras, I would actually argue I prefer the image out of the M8. This might be a little bit subjective. Sure, it's not as sharp as the S9, but I think if you're really serious about the webcam experience, 100% recommend that you actually purchase one. So just like the M8, there are a few things about the S9 that I don't like. And it can be quite annoying if these are things you have absolutely no idea that you're going to encounter. So I'll just run down a few things that kind of rubbed me the wrong way with the S9. Now, one of the first things you're definitely going to encounter is when you're trying to rotate the display. If it's not too much trouble, I would kind of advise you just unplug everything when you want to set it into its vertical position, because if you do this, you're more often than not going to pull off the power cable. This happened to me a number of times. They probably should have figured this out properly before throwing in the vertical rotation feature on there. Just be slow when you're doing it. That way, you're not going to go into any of those issues. Now, the second thing I wanted to point out that I didn't really like is the port section. It's not the actual selection, but how it's built. If you're trying to plug anything into the ports, you can clearly see all of the ports pressed into the frame itself. If this is something you're doing repeatedly over time, it's possible that you could break something. So I'll just say, just try to be careful, because this looks like something you can easily break over time if you're not that careful. Now, another random thing was the fact that on the remote, if you hold the home key, you can bring up like a quick pop-up menu. On the M8, this is quite snappy. It pops up in about 2 seconds. On the S9, it could take up to like 4 seconds to get that same menu to pop up. I don't know why this is the case, but I definitely wish this was something that they improved on better. That's just something that people are not going to like. But it doesn't really bother me too much because it's not always laggy. But the times when it is, it's kind of annoying. So after using the S9 for a little over a week now, what do I recommend? Sadly, just like the M8, I just can't recommend this monitor directly to anyone. If you're looking to get this monitor, I think there are a few things you need to understand. First of all, if the 5K resolution is not a big deal to you, there are so many different options you can get in the market that are just as great. You can actually get a 43-inch OLED monitor. You can get a high refresh monitor, 4K 144 Hz. There are so many options you can get. However, the 5K resolution is important to you. Let's take the conversation further. If you are a Mac user, so you're entrenched into the Apple ecosystem, I think it just makes natural sense to go with the Studio Display. You're gonna get better integration on that. You can control it out of the box, brightness, volume, amazing speakers, it has spatial audio, amazing build quality, no brainer. However, if you're someone who cares about multiple inputs, you could get the S9. It actually does support AirPlay, so if that's something you use, you'd be happy to know that you can use that. I think you can get a very good viewing experience on the S9 comparable to the Studio Display. Now, if you are a Windows user and you care about the 5K resolution, this is your only real option if you think about it. Most PCs don't come with a Thunderbolt cable, and that's the only way you can connect the display. So you have to install a PCIe Thunderbolt card, and that's anywhere between $150 to $200 extra that you have to spend. And that's crazy because there are no buttons on the Studio Display at all. The Studio Display relies solely on the Mac to be able to control any of the features. You can't do that if you're running it from Windows. Now, there may be third-party apps that you could install, but again, this is just hoops you're going to have to go through when you're going to be spending that much. If you're going to get the Samsung S9, I would advise you get it on sale. It's very likely that Samsung is going to be doing sales on this from time to time. Just be on the lookout, and that way you're going to feel much better about your purchase. That being said, what is my own personal takeaway with this monitor? I think these series of monitors have actually grown on me. I don't know what it is. They are quirky, don't have the best build quality, but they look good. They work really well. Now moving over to the S9, it's just leaps and bounds over the M8. It's not even a comparison at this point. Hopefully this video was helpful. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this monitor. Is it great? Is it trash? What are some of the missed opportunities you think Samsung had with this? And I'll catch you in the next one. Stay safe and have a great time.